Hello YouTube, Marauders here, and today I have the Nerf Rebelle Agent Messenger Bow. So this is an actual bow from the Nerf Rebelle line, and as you can see, it's an actual bow in the sense that it's not a crossbow. There aren't any springs or plungers to lock. You actually fire real enough arrows by use of a simple elastic string. Now, because this is basically an actual bow and you're firing it using the raw power of this drawstring here, the arrows actually fly pretty far. They fly further than any I would say they fly about twice as far as any Nerf gun I've seen when I pull it to the maximum. And of course, because that they are whistling, they have this whistling hole, and at the speed that they are flying out, they fly really far and they whistle really loud. So you might think that this is a great toy to play with, but unfortunately there's just one little problem, and that's the fact that this is an actual bow. And if you study history, people will tell you that bows are very hard to use properly. So the first thing here is that when you draw, when you load an arrow and you pull it back, there are many ways for you to just crook your hand to the left, to the right, and when you release the arrow, depending on how you angled your hand when you let it go, the arrow is never going to fly straight. It's very hard to aim properly. They have a little sight thing here on the inside of the arrow on the bow, where it actually lights up with a fake little red dot sight on it, but it's not gonna help, even less so than any sight that you attach on a Nerf gun. So it's very hard to aim, and at the speeds they fly through, it's actually quite a dangerous toy to play with. Even if the arrowheads are essentially a very large version of a mega dart, so impact is a bit lighter than a mega dart, so you don't have to worry about hitting someone in the face with it, but it's probably still going to sting at close range. Now, the other problem I want to point out about the arrows is that these arrows are fragile. Now these arrows are actually slightly curved. Now, as anyone who shoots, if you ask anyone who shoots real arrows, they will tell you that if an arrow that's curved is not going to fly straight, it's going to go everywhere. So it's very easy to bend the arrow. I mean, and you don't even need to simply like shoot the arrow into the wall or anything. The mere act of loading the arrow and pulling and tugging on it, because as your hand tugs on the arrow left and right, that very act will start bending the arrow. And then, depending on how you launch it, because when the arrow passes through the chamber, sometimes it will rub off, it will hit the sides of the chamber. Now the problem with that is, the feather tips of the arrow, it's actually a nice little foam like thing, so they are not actually paper or anything. So you might think that they are tougher, they're more resilient, but the problem here is that they are basically, instead of being a full piece through the arrow, it's basically just a little tip glued onto the side of the arrow. So eventually, when you launch an arrow enough, you eventually disengage and drop off the feather. So once you do that, well, you lose all aerodynamicness, and this arrow is pretty much a gone case. And well, and the main problem with that is that you can't find any replacement arrows. At least I can't find them here. So 3 is it. And Now you may be wondering, what's the big deal about damaged arrows? Because when we play with our normal Nerf dart shooting guns, a damaged Nerf dart, well, it just won't fire as far. So what's the big deal about damaged arrow? It shouldn't be the same. Now the problem here is that this is an actual bow. This is not a gun. So when the arrow shoots out of the bow, it has to travel in a straight line out from this firing chamber. So when your arrow is bent, it won't travel through a straight line through. So if you're lucky, the arrow will shoot out and it will veer off to the side once it leaves the chamber. But as I discovered while I was testing this and playing this with my son, eventually these things will be totally unusable. Let's see if we can do this. Eventually you will never be able to launch an arrow anymore. What's gonna happen is that every time you try to launch an arrow, because of the way it's damaged, it will just keep jamming itself in the chamber, and that becomes very frustrating. You can try and shoot it 9 out of 10 times, the arrow is not gonna leave the chamber. That's a very bad toy. And the matter of fact is that that it didn't take weeks or anything to happen. All it did was that it just took me about 2 evenings of playing with it and testing it out with my kids to actually end up with a scenario where all the arrows were pretty much unusable. It's very hard to fire out from the arrow or from the bow anymore. So when we first got it, the performance was great, it shoots far, it was amazing. But after those few hours, as the arrows started getting bent and as I realized more and more that I was failing to launch arrows out from the bow, and then I figured out what was happening, I would have to say that as cool as this real bow action is, it's not a good toy because of the fragility of the arrows. Definitely not recommended. If you want to buy a Rebelle, something from the Rebelle line, yeah, go ahead. They got a lot of nice crossbow style guns. But this, Okay, so this is Marauders. Catch you later.